Picture a Tuesday afternoon in late October, 1994. The air outside is starting to carry that specific, crisp scent of decaying leaves and wood smoke, and inside a quiet suburban living room, the late-day sun is hitting a dusty stack of photo albums on a coffee table. You're sitting there, flipping through the plastic-sleeved pages, when you come across a photo of a small, somewhat confused-looking human covered in strained peas. That human is you. You're wearing a striped onesie, you're gripping a plastic spoon like it's a medieval mace, and you are clearly having a very intense emotional experience involving a bowl of mashed vegetables. But here's the problem. The person in that photo is a complete stranger to you. You can see the physical evidence that you were there, you can see the light in your eyes and the specific way your hair curled over your left ear, but you have absolutely no internal record of that moment. You don't remember the peas. You don't remember the high chair. You don't even remember the person taking the photo. It's like a 3-year chunk of your life was simply deleted from the hard drive before you ever had the chance to hit save. As it happens, and this is the part that usually starts to feel a bit unsettling if you think about it for too long, you lived an entire lifetime before you were 4 years old. You learned how to navigate gravity, you decoded the complex phonetic structures of a human language, and you formed deep emotional bonds with the people around you. You were a fully functioning, learning, feeling individual. Yet, for nearly every single one of us, the first 1,000 days of our existence are a total black hole. It's a phenomenon that has puzzled psychologists for over a century, and it's led to some pretty wild theories about why our brains seem to treat our infancy like a classified document that's been redacted into oblivion. We like to think of our memory as a video camera that just started recording the moment we opened our eyes, but the reality is much more like a camera that was recording perfectly well, only for someone to come along every night and snap the film. Now, for a long time, the standard explanation was pretty insulting to babies. Scientists basically assumed that infant brains were just underbaked. The theory was that because a baby's brain is still growing, it's simply too simple or too mushy to form long-term memories. We figured the hardware wasn't installed yet, so the software couldn't run. But as it turns out, and this realization changed the entire field of developmental psychology, that's completely wrong. Babies are actually memory-making machines. They are arguably better at learning and absorbing information than you are right now. If you don't believe me, just look at how fast a toddler learns the layout of a house or the exact tone of voice that will get them a cookie. They aren't failing to remember, something else is happening to those memories after they're formed. To understand how we know babies can remember, we have to look at a classic piece of research from the 1980s. At Rutgers University, a psychologist named Carolyn Rowe-Collier conducted a series of experiments that were as simple as they were brilliant. She didn't use high-tech brain scans. She used a crib, a colorful mobile, and a piece of silk ribbon. She would lay a baby in the crib and tie one end of the ribbon to the baby's ankle and the other end to the mobile. The babies, being naturally curious and bored, would eventually kick their legs. When they did, the mobile would jiggle and dance. The babies loved this. They would kick more and more, realizing that they were the ones controlling the movement. They were learning a cause and effect relationship. But the real test came days, or even weeks, later. Rowe-Collier would bring the same babies back, put them in the same crib with the same mobile, but this time, she wouldn't tie the ribbon. Almost instantly, the babies would start kicking their legs. They remembered. They were looking for that same result they'd achieved before. Even 2-month-old infants could remember this trick for a couple of days, and by the time they were 6 months old, they could remember it for 2 weeks. This proved once and for all that the infant brain is perfectly capable of encoding and storing information. The memories are being made. The question is, where do they go? This brings us to our first major hurdle, which, if you've ever tried to find a specific file on a computer with a corrupted directory, might feel very familiar, and that is the hardware of the brain itself. Specifically, we have to talk about a little structure called the hippocampus. It's a small, curved piece of tissue deep in the temporal lobe that looks a bit like a seahorse, and it's essentially the librarian of your brain. When you experience something, like eating a particularly good taco or watching a sunset, your senses send that data to the hippocampus. The hippocampus then processes that information and decides how to index it so it can be stored in the long-term memory banks of the cerebral cortex. In adults, this system is a well-oiled machine. But in a baby, the hippocampus is still a construction site. Research by scientists like Nora Newcomb and her colleagues has shown that different parts of the hippocampus mature at different rates. One specific area called the dentate gyrus, which acts as a sort of gateway for incoming information, isn't fully developed until you're around 4 or 5 years old. It's like trying to run a high-speed fiber optic internet connection through a dial-up modem. The data is coming in, but the gateway can't process it fast enough to turn it into a permanent, autobiographical memory. You might remember how to kick a mobile or how a certain toy feels, but you can't yet file the memory as a specific event that happened to you at a specific time and place. But even that doesn't explain everything. If the hardware is just slow, you'd expect at least some memories to trickle through, right? This is where we hit the most counterintuitive wow fact in the entire study of memory. It's a theory that suggests you don't forget being a baby because your brain was too weak, but because it was too active. In 2014, 2 neuroscientists in Toronto, Sheena Jocelyn and Paul Franklin, published a paper in the journal Science that flipped the script on infantile amnesia. They were looking at something called neurogenesis, the birth of new neurons. In the first few years of your life, your brain is producing new neurons at an astronomical rate. It's the busiest construction project in the known universe. Millions of new cells are being born and integrated into the existing circuitry of your brain every single day. We used to think this was purely a good thing. More neurons equals more brain power, right? Well, Jocelyn and Franklin discovered a catch. When a new neuron is born and forced into an existing circuit, it has to physically disrupt the connections that are already there to make room for itself. Think of it like this. Imagine you have a small, cozy library where every book is perfectly organized on the shelves. Now imagine that every day, someone comes in and tries to install a brand new, massive bookshelf right in the middle of the room. To do it, they have to tear down the old shelves, throw the books on the floor, and rewire the lighting. The library is getting bigger and better, but in the process, the old filing system is being completely destroyed. The very process that makes your brain so incredibly flexible and capable of learning, the rapid growth of new neurons, is the same process that wipes the slate clean. Your earliest memories aren't just fading, they are being actively overwritten by the growth of your own mind. Jocelyn and Franklin tested this on mice, and they found that if they artificially slowed down the rate of neurogenesis in infant mice, those mice actually held onto their memories much longer. Conversely, if they sped up neurogenesis in adult mice, the adults started becoming as forgetful as babies. This suggests a bizarre biological trade-off, which, quite frankly, feels like a bit of a cosmic prank. Your brain sacrifices your past so that you can have a future. It clears out the beta version of your memories to make room for the sophisticated, adult-level architecture you'll need for the rest of your life. But biology is only half the story. There's another, more psychological reason why that photo of you with the peas feels like it belongs to a stranger. To have a memory of an event, you need to have a self to anchor that event to. This is where we get into the mirror test, a famous experiment first developed by Gordon Gallup Jr. in the 1970s and later applied to human infants by researchers like Beulah Amsterdam. If you put a small child in front of a mirror, they generally react in one of two ways. If they're under 18 months old, they usually think the person in the mirror is another baby. They'll wave at it, try to touch it, or look behind the mirror to find their new friend. They don't realize they are looking at themselves. However, if you take a bit of red rouge and secretly dab it on the baby's nose, and then put them back in front of the mirror, something fascinating happens around the 18 to 24-month mark. Suddenly, the baby doesn't reach for the mirror. They reach for their own nose. They look in the mirror and think, wait a minute, that's me and I've got something on my face. This is the birth of self-recognition. It's the moment you realize that you are a distinct individual, separate from your parents and the world around you. Developmental psychologists Mark Howe and Mary Courage argue that you can't form autobiographical memories where you are the protagonist of the story, until you actually have a concept of me. Before that point, your experiences are just raw data. They are smells, sounds, and feelings, but they aren't your experiences because there is no you there to claim them yet. You are basically a series of sensations without a narrator. Interestingly, and this is where we can see the massive impact of our environment, the way we talk about our lives actually changes the way we remember them. This brings us to the role of language and culture, which acts as the scaffolding for our memories. Think about how you remember things as an adult. You usually remember them as a story. First I went to the store, then I realized I forgot my wallet, then I felt embarrassed. We use words to organize our experiences into a linear timeline. Without language, our memories are just a chaotic pile of snapshots. Psychologist Catherine Nelson, a pioneer in this field, suggested that we learn how to remember by talking to our parents. When a mother asks her child, "Remember when we went to the park and you saw the big dog?" she isn't just asking a question. She is teaching the child how to structure a memory. She is showing them what details are important, the location, the event, the emotion, and how to string them together into a narrative. This is called elaborative reminiscing, and it turns out that some cultures do this much more than others. This leads to one of the most fascinating wow facts in the history of memory research. Chi Wang, a professor at Cornell University, has spent years studying the earliest memories of people from different cultural backgrounds. She found a consistent and striking difference. On average, people in Western cultures, like the United States, have their first memories starting around age 3 or 3.5. But in many East Asian cultures, where the emphasis is often more on the collective group than the individual self, the average age for the first memory is closer to 4 or even older. The most extreme example of this, however, comes from the Maori people of New Zealand. The Maori have a very rich oral tradition that places a huge amount of importance on personal and family history. Maori parents tend to talk to their children about the past in a very detailed, storytelling-focused way from a very young age. As a result, and this should make us all a little jealous of our own lost years, the average Maori adult can remember things back to when they were just 2.5 years old. Their culture literally gives them an extra year of their own life back, simply by providing them with the linguistic tools to hold on to it. It proves that memory isn't just something that happens inside your skull. It's something we build through our interactions with the world. So, if you're looking at that photo of yourself in the high chair and feeling a little frustrated that you can't reach back and touch that moment, just remember that your brain was busy doing something much more important than archiving your lunch. It was performing a total overhaul of its own structure. It was clearing out the old, fragmented circuits to make way for the person you are today. You are, in a very literal sense, the product of a massive, biological delete key. Which brings us to a slightly haunting question, one that philosophers have been arguing about for centuries: if the brain that experienced your first steps was physically dismantled and rebuilt, and if the self that lived those years is a person you can no longer access, is that baby even the same person as you? In philosophy, this is often called the ship of Theseus paradox. If you replace every single wooden plank on a ship, one by one, until not a single piece of the original wood remains, is it still the same ship? Your brain has done exactly that. It has replaced the neurons, the connections, and even the way it processes information. You are the same physical entity, sure, but the you that existed in 1994 is a ghost. That version of you is gone, and they didn't leave a forwarding address. This doesn't mean those early years are wasted, though. Far from it. Even if you don't have episodic memories, the kind you can replay like a movie, you still have implicit memories. This is the body memory that stays with you. You don't remember learning how to walk, but your body knows how to do it. You don't remember the exact moment you learned that a hot stove is dangerous, but you still pull your hand away. You don't remember the specific way your parents held you, but that sense of security, or the lack of it, is wired into the very foundations of your personality. The first 3 years of your life are the blueprint for everything that came after. The memories might be gone, but the shape they left behind is still there. You are a house built on a foundation you've never seen. By the way, and this is a fun experiment to try at your next family gathering, if you ask your parents or older siblings about your earliest years, you might find that you remember things that never actually happened. This is another quirk of our memory system. Because we have such a massive gap in our early history, our brains are desperate to fill it in. If your mom tells you a story often enough about the time you got lost in the grocery store when you were 2, your brain might eventually take that information and manufacture a memory of it. You'll start to see the aisles and feel the panic even though you're actually just visualizing a story you've been told. It's called a false memory, and it's remarkably easy to create. Our brains would rather have a fake history than no history at all. This realization leads us back to that dusty photo album. When you look at that picture of yourself, you aren't looking at a memory. You're looking at a piece of evidence. You're like a detective investigating a cold case, trying to piece together the life of a person who no longer exists. You have the artifacts, the old clothes, the blurry photos, the stories from your relatives, but the actual witness is gone. The person who lived those moments was deleted to make room for the person who is currently reading these words. It's a bit of a tragedy in a way. You were there for the most transformative years of your life, and you didn't get to keep a single souvenir. But perhaps that's for the best. Imagine if you remembered every single moment of your infancy. Every diaper change, every terrifyingly loud sneeze, every hour spent crying for a reason you couldn't explain. Our adult brains are designed to filter out the noise and focus on what's important for survival and social interaction. A baby's brain is designed for something else: total, unfiltered absorption. It's a high-bandwidth, high-chaos state of being. If we kept those memories, they might be so overwhelming that we couldn't function as adults. The forgetting is a protective layer, a way to ensure that we start our conscious life with a clean, organized workspace. The more we look into the science of infantile amnesia, the more we realize that it's not a flaw in the system. It's a feature. From the rapid-fire neurogenesis discovered by Jocelyn and Franklin to the cultural scaffolding explored by Chi Wang, every part of this process is designed to turn a chaotic, sensory-driven infant into a coherent, story-driven adult. We lose our childhood so that we can gain our adulthood. We trade our earliest moments for the ability to understand the world and our place in it. This process, which, if you think about it, is a bit like the metamorphosis of a caterpillar into a butterfly, requires a total breakdown of the old structure before the new one can emerge. The caterpillar doesn't just grow wings. It literally dissolves into a soup of cells before being reorganized into a completely different creature. Your brain did something remarkably similar. It dissolved your early experiences to build the complex, thinking, remembering being you are now. You had to forget how to be a baby so you could remember how to be a person. It's a strange bargain we all make without knowing it. We enter the world as a blank slate. We spend a few years filling that slate with the most incredible, foundational experiences, and then we wipe it clean so we can start writing the real story of our lives. We are all walking around with a massive hole in our biography, a missing first chapter that we can never quite rewrite. We try to fill it with photos and stories, but we'll never truly know what it felt like to be that person in the striped onesie, gripping the plastic spoon, experiencing the world for the very first time. So, the next time you find yourself straining to remember your 3rd birthday or the name of your first stuffed animal, don't feel like your brain is failing you. Instead, take a moment to appreciate the incredible, invisible work your mind was doing back then. It was building the architecture of your consciousness. It was wiring up the circuits of your personality. It was quite literally creating you from scratch. And while it's a bit sad that you can't go back and visit that version of yourself, there's also something beautiful about it. Those years aren't lost. They are just hidden in the foundations. They are the invisible support beams that hold up everything you think, feel, and believe today. If you found this dive into the deleted scenes of your life interesting, you might want to take a second and think about what your own earliest memory actually is. Is it a real memory, or is it a story someone told you? Have you ever had a flashback to a smell or a sound that you couldn't quite place? We'd love to hear about those weird, fragmented half-memories in the comments. Sometimes the stuff that almost made it through the delete key is the most fascinating of all. And if you want to keep exploring the stranger corners of human psychology and the mysteries of how your own mind works, consider subscribing and joining us for the next deep dive. We're always looking for the next rabbit hole to fall down. When you look back at your life, you probably see a continuous line that stretches from your current moment all the way back to your earliest childhood memory, But that line is an illusion created by a brain that hates empty spaces. The truth is that your life didn't begin with your first memory. It began with a total, systematic destruction of everything that came before it. You aren't the baby in those old, faded photographs. You are the person who was built on top of its grave.